Alright, 당은 거기 동아 타달려 줘야지. 난 상지고방 토비치도 아니면 저기 람냠술렌제 아니 맞아 상지고방 토투고 매바로 디네자 다 상지고방 토비치로 탑람 람냠링이 짐바 람림 어도스네 아주야직 람직 도람 림바 직시하지 않네 어도스네 송샤바데 아주 디톨이야 아주 롭정지 친연지거와 디네자 당아주 람림 그전에 쉬네 다된 마 치연지에들 들이 쉬어야 되는 아주다 지취 년비 주다 안에 취 시비 주 년간는 년난가서 년고래서야다 나 취시gen 라미원에 취간의 시고래서야다 언디네게는 줄리아는 투모도 자수에서 어디스고 디고 마셔로다.
Good evening. So in order to attain liberation from all of the sufferings of samsara, and in fact to attain enlightenment itself, it is indispensable to cultivate mental paths. These mental paths that need to be cultivated are presented in the Lamrim tradition, in the particular graduated sequence in which we should train our minds in order to cultivate the paths that lead to enlightenment. So for this reason, we are studying this text. So tonight we start a new chapter, listening to and explaining the Dharma. For those with the ebook, it's on page 20. For those with the paper book, it's on page 19. And it has 3 points: how to listen, how to explain, and how to conclude the session.
Lamrim Nalma Song du Kunlo Delia, so Dang Jugi, Sanji Goban to be chewing on the Che said the Givi Jawachevadi. The Nigi Givi Javache, Gavadi, Sanji Goban to be good Joda Mother said Kunlo Rally Gore, Kunlo Janjism Simbachina, and then Sanji Goban to be Gushagore, Javachima Hada Mu Goban to be Gu in Bamase, and the Jig Hada Gasore, Nyomomba, Tamje Bombe, Bombayan, Bontuya and Dele Yomo Basha and Jeva Pompe, Sanjoko to be Gusha to Guru, Kuno Janjus Misimbachi or Ezero. Isn't that Kuno Janjus in Masimbache, Tarba during its Misimbaina, Niki Java Karchevene, Tarba to be Gusam Chagrimaton, Sanjoko Gucha to Mares. In the other Kuno Delea, and Chikewachi Malhada Mukova, some Tobajibe, did some Yukunela Janjuchenium. Dipon Gerup Chavaina Kevadida, Kevachimal Hada Mukova to be Gusamato, and Tabatan Tamchikim Bokova to Guchago Mareje. Tine Zadan Joge, Sanjokova to be Gova to be to Geva to Yala, Kuno Janjus Misimbach Kugore, Dine Zadan, Semja Tamjiki Duno, a Sanjokova to brush, Jigins, and the Chedo, Nide, Anzuki Chin Yeshidi, to Chigins and Bedan, Chazan, some local Masona, the Munity Kugor.
The accumulation of virtue, this is Dharma. So virtue itself is Dharma. And virtue is required in order to progress towards a state of liberation or enlightenment. Virtue is required in order to eliminate suffering and its causes. So whether a particular activity, the virtue that's gained through a particular activity leads to a result within the Dharma depends on the motivation. In other words, if one is cultivating a virtuous outlook, cultivating the minds of the Dharma, in dependence on one's motivation, one will be creating causes directed towards the attainment of that specific goal. So if one has the burning desire to ensure that one does not fall into the lower realms, and thereby accumulates virtue, practices the Dharma, that virtue one creates will lead to a good rebirth. But it will only lead to a good rebirth. It will not lead to a higher spiritual goal. Similarly, if one has the determination to gain freedom from suffering in its entirety, to gain liberation from samsara, then with such a motivation, the virtue one accumulates will lead to the attainment of liberation, but not a greater goal than that. Whereas if one cultivates a motivation that I must become a Buddha for the sake of others, I need to attain enlightenment so that I can be of greatest benefit to others, with such a motivation, the same virtuous act becomes a cause that will eventually lead to the attainment of Buddhahood. So therefore, if the motivation is a lesser goal, the virtue that is accumulated cannot directly lead to the attainment of a goal greater than that. Moreover, to attain liberation, it's indispensable that one cultivates the wisdom realizing emptiness, and to attain enlightenment, in addition to that, it is also indispensable that one must cultivate bodhicitta, and thereby all one's virtuous practices are conjoined with bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment.
ngui che da ding a ngui ni su de ta da ji ha mo go che ngui ni su de le do be ge de ma chen bi de da mi tin be le ga ji le de le go ro ba da che sa de ne za chue se ding a ngui ni su de tun ba ngui ni su de ni she di je go re se de nga zu ya ji ge pa ra chue che se bu ro jing go sung go ro ba de ne za de ya na nga zu sem gi ju wa dan yu to ne nga zu ge ji ya go che go re se de sem gi yu da we to ne ya bo su go re se de di ngui ni su de nga zu ma sung go ro ba de za chue se de de da ro shi de ne shi do wa.
The purpose of the Dharma is to transform our way of thinking, to radically transform our way of thinking. In particular, we are obscured as to how things exist in reality. We do not understand reality. And because we do not understand reality, we act in ways that are contradictory to reality. The cultivation of the minds of the Dharma, they directly or indirectly serve to enable us to transform our mind, change our mind, so that it becomes in accordance with reality. In other words, as we cultivate knowledge of what reality is, how phenomena exist in reality, in this way we start to act ever more in accordance with reality.
ane yabu mara esene kuma kuya ta miswe ta ane junxie de gohwa ta ta jikjebe ne di yabu mara eseje di nga ju jiso na la ju che ge shi mai ba na ji dang ne jiso na ya di yabu mara eseje jesan di jene ne mo ya che de ga bu ji go mara jesan da kuma ku miswe de ni ge ane jikshan ya zewang ta ya don tu zhe ta ya che ne di ma thi ba de se sa ma thi ba da jiso ge di go ya mara se di kapi talam la ya di meba soya ke kaya ke tablam la garji go resene kole nyeba de ya chemgang ta ya ane chikol ya dine chine ane gyuwa ta ya ke tablam di shi go ro ba ane kachi ko shengi dine na soso na ra ina dine ke chikang ali de kang se ya ya tablam dil ya ane garjo ne chang dong ya ane ji simen sa ya 안지기밀이야 초고자야 안디마제 타말이야 딜레우토네데 라시자야 딘데 중고로 디가 가주 강아데 먹어야 돼 제가 디 고고 말봐 지소나를 고고 말아 니 먹어야 돼 세에 탑람디 먼저 지소나려야 되는 스페시 딴 거로 와
Society looks down on certain activities and actively discourages certain activities. For example, killing or stealing. These are seen as so unwanted that they are illegal. And other behaviors are looked down on, are discouraged. For example, deceiving people, lying to people. So this is unwanted behavior that is seen by society to be unacceptable. So the path or the method to stop such behavior is for one to cultivate a path, a mental understanding of the harm, the potential harm that will befall oneself should one engage in such behavior. So if one kills or steals, one knows one risks imprisonment or a fine. If one does those activities or other activities which are looked down on by society, such as lying or deceiving others, then one will be socially ostracized. One's friends may not want to have anything to do with one. So here, what serves to discourage one from engaging in such behavior is recognizing the potential harm that will come to oneself. Likewise, through seeing the faults that come through excessive drinking, that leads to argument and fracturing of relationships and perhaps even violent conflict. Such behavior then is seen as behavior best avoided by society. And this recognition of this too serves to discourage people from engaging in such behavior.
Kolya trim da da nyeba da da zonggang ju di zem yugo se de kale khabu re chile da sang yi chomnen dige tablam khar sung gorsan di ma se di kan se gorla na di meba so ya di kan se gorsan na samno tawi de ne samno gyuwa tawi de ne meba so gore chile chisa da samno gyuwa tawi de ne meba kan se gore la yo de chisa shen lia mi shen so jo ji ya da gumo gu ya da shen lia tu je da de ne ge samno di me samlo de meba so gore chisa de ne ma yo de kuno samlo de meba so di samlo de meba so wala lunga yisu mi ko ne shen la meba chi mi be nyejo de bi surim sung go gore so so la la de ne ge nyejo de bi surim de shen la meba chi mi surim sung ba ina en digi so so ya samlo di shen la meba che da chaba che da shen la ka de samlo do ko ma res ma ko ba na lunga gi de jawa ji ba res chisa de ne enza an di meba so tu gore chisa 이 삼다탕토는 연구를 지상 외에서 아주 중学배 직진 지소를 뭐야디 아주 구구어 말때 이 매버 속에 탑람 부이다 보징 아주 직진 배 지소란 배시 당투고 말 지상 상이 좀는 디게다디 자원이 매버 속에 삼로도 스타웨트는 교화 당고래 세디 다디 중국어와 제자디네 자 현리의 최외 삼바 마야들 샹샹의 잠바다 자와의 니지 공고래 디나 현리의 최외 삼바 연구를 현리 차와 지금 말해 제자 잠바다 자와 공부를 수림 송고를 자다 제자다 당은 저기 디네 자상 얘기다 디무인이 주게 람된 먼저 냠는지게 림바 최스나디 아주 동아세 규데 녀모바데기 매바서에게 답람디 대 송고로 와다
Therefore, the technique that society presents to prevent unwanted behavior is either using the law by making certain behavior illegal, or by society looking down on certain behaviors. And whilst that is the case, and it does certainly limit unwanted behavior, it doesn't bring an end to unwanted behavior. There is still killing, stealing, lying, and deceptive behavior in society. So in reality, the method that society produces, or the method from society, does not bring a complete end to such behavior. Buddha Shakyamuni, though, on the other hand, he taught a different method. He taught the way to stop unwanted behavior is to transform your mind, to transform your way of thinking. Because if the thought, the intention does not arise to bring harm, one is not going to directly bring harm. And how to do so? As the foundation is to cultivate ethical restraint. The ethical restraint of restraining one's physical behavior, restraining one's speech, and restraining one's mind from coming under the influence of the afflictions. If one cultivates such an ethical outlook, one will not have the motivation to harm. One will not want to bring any harm to others. And in reality, this is a method that works. Having cultivated a stable foundation of ethics, one will not bring harm. Similarly, if that's or furthermore, if one's ethics is enhanced with the cultivation of motivations such as love and compassion, that will further serve to restrain one's mind from even going in the direction of bringing harm to others. And thereby, harm will not follow from one's behavior. So therefore, Buddha Shakyamuni taught an effective method that can, in reality, prevent harm. In brief, this is the method he taught for how to eradicate the afflictions.
제야 냐다 직sem전 삼세도와 semjen도와 삼세디 고등한 외계 삼라기래 디 추나라 잼쟁도와 민념도 잼쟁 냐로치도와디 어디 가르치우서는 제모지 제 세외지로 컨트롤 칼라지 되기도와 도구나 냐치 칼라지 되기도와 되네지 네 안디나 신아 저기 점점 지게 때문에 되네 지 힘에다 자다 직 때문에 용도와 되네 때문에 직제 제 사회니 직직 내가 제 사회를 코사야지 되기도와 안디나 신냐만 먼저 자디게 된 바 프로도 미가 라바가 밥진 바로 수로 제대 직례도 거 칼라지 되기도와 홀라 지상 그 디칼라 제반서 디미 거부제제 그 연구도 지기도 하대 지상 그 아주 파직 콜레 제제 판도제 전부 지기나 그 연구를 와다 난 디마제제 니다 다음에 갈래 하고로 와서 용해야 돼게 탑시단 거와 진짜 디네자 아주게 삼바 상보다 지 펜바 두고나 라레 디기마 샬라 지투 투여 바데 다 디네게 아주 지 데모로 춘춘춘을 따베네 디네 김제에서 데코 제고야데 김제 가래서 디제베네 그 연구로 디네 어디 나라 디제우 섬지기 내가 레고로 제가 디네에서 삼다나 디 데모로 따베네 디네 통화도 디 김제 삼다나 그 파야고라지 직제베네 그 돈다 지 내가 디코 레투고요 바 지기요 바딩아 세고로 통도와
This method that Buddha Shakyamuni presented is completely in accordance with reality. And actually, if we observe either what you've experienced in your own homes, or perhaps we've seen on YouTube or on television, when trainers try and train animals, they use inducements to try and train the animals to act in a particular way. So, for example, when people are training dolphins, they get dolphins to perform remarkable tricks, and how to do so by giving them some fish to eat. Or if you're training your pets at home, whether your dogs or a bird, and you're training them to do a particular trick, you feed them something. So if one wants to call a bird to oneself, they are coming to you because they know you are going to give them something to eat. So this is how one trains beings to engage in certain behavior, by getting them to recognize for themselves that if they want to receive something they like, they need to act in a particular way. So this is a technique for training the mind.
안디니 자당 주게 되니게 삼로 주와 당하디 하고 해야래야 되니 당고 퇴고야 돼 계신부에서 제자 정원도 퇴고 그래서 진짜 되니 자다 최년비 수유시 년비 최다 아니 되는 마년에 년간줄이야 시비 주도 안투모의 제비 수유시야지 또 숨체 해 당보들라 다 년비 수되라야 아니 최퇴비게 편연 가려서 편연되는 시절에 최퇴비 편연다 아니 최퇴비 편연 안 최단 최마와래 림르게 봐서 최들이야 안지기 대바지 될이야 최고부야다 최승은디게리야 아니 지기 최고부야다 되는 림르 제와시 제가 되네 최년수용을 써야 돼 온도체는 sabjil 마선의 디도와
So looking at our text, this chapter starts, or first of all, we have these three outlines: how to listen, how to explain, and how to conclude the session. So there's a little bit missed in the English here, but the meaning is how to conclude the session relates to both listening and explaining. Then then we come to the very first of these three outlines, how to listen to the Dharma. So this is presented right at the beginning, because if the purpose of the Dharma is to train our mind, one needs to hear teachings or listen to teachings in order to understand how to train the mind, why to train the mind, and how to do so. So this has 3 points: contemplating the benefits of listening to the Dharma, developing respect for the Dharma and those who teach the Dharma, and thirdly, the actual way to listen. So then starting at the very first one, contemplating the benefits of listening to the Dharma.
On the Chubiki, Paying Carriore, Senate in the Mana, Tibet, some said the Sanji, Son Shebi, and Tibet, some said you on the Niki, Dinan Macarson, Senate, Tibet, Chenam, Sheber, Dur, Tibet, Dile, Doberche, Tibet, Duma, Yimpa Bong, Tibet, Yang, and Deva Tops, and Ondus and Son Reshi.
Looking at a sutra quotation from verses about listening. Through listening, the Dharma is understood. Through listening, bad actions are reversed. Through listening, the meaningless is abandoned. Through listening, nirvana is achieved.
Tebi Chunam Shebar Guru said the Karsungor Sene, Jazan Ya Anachik Che, Shi, Tune, Tutambo, Togures, Chizan de Dine, Tune, Dondadele, some time or do, and then Arazulia, Bangwegi, Chedi, Karaka, Samonala, Bangwe, the Karakarim, Banja Karakarim, but how Gures, Chizada, and Arazu Yamzulia di Karakarim, but how to Gures, Chizada, Banja Karimba, how Nyamsu Lengoya de Karim Hakoya, Della Tenena, Pangtang Kanese, Nyamsu Lenang Kanesim Bares, Chizan Panja Dang, Langjegi, and the Chetiki, Namietiki, and the Shi Hakuri, Tibio Chenam Shepherd Urusida.
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. So through listening, one gathers knowledge, gathers information. One comes to understand what brings harm and therefore needs to be abandoned. And accompanying that, how to do so. So one learns what causes harm and how to abandon it. Accompanying this, one hears what brings benefit and then learns how to put it into practice, or how to be very literal, how to gain experience of it, how to develop it in one's mind. So this is at the start. One needs to gather knowledge, and whilst one is gathering it, think. So think about it, reflect on it. So one starts with hearing and reflecting.
Jagors that the new mob Panja, new mob Mason, Rikin in the Yore said Panja, Tisu Chaza, Moher and other Chaza, Delatin Dunga Yungore, Chesa Dunga Yure, Jesopa Meva Sokore, said Jago to Gorva. Chesa that the Meva Sobala, and then Meva Sudan, Canesogore, La Dinyambo, and Chige. Jambata, Zewa Comiata, Nindi, and Dame about to be Shirada, and Metapo to be Dusin, and Yamling Badia, some of the native Tangura, D, Nibodiba, the native said it, and the Trebig, turn and the Hago, and the turn the Hago, Jezada, Nibodi, Lam, Dusin and Yamsul, or Diti Comgudo, then Yamsul Langa in Barsidu, Jitan Jambata, Zewada, Dame about to be Shirasiada, and Jiggy. And the nigger some of the Chasang Yamsul Languia, Jazan, Manzulia, this some of the Gomjing or completed Tanguia, how go you do the Yamsul Laja in Hawkes. She's not 10 hour mother to Matthew Baina, Jiggy, Chiggy, Turge, Matthew Baina, the Corosana, or the Coros. Some of the men of Gol Shire that in the society Yungdo, says that the nigger corner San Tubuja Mato, Corner Meva Suegi, Tablamdi, some look and stand Meva Sugar says some Tatu Gomara. She's not too big, Turbine, Tubi, Yamnechidu, and then let how to be said, Tubi Chenam Shepherd, you said, Tapanja, Langi, Shigiri. 간데 방고래 님보 간데 땡고래 냠수 간데 땡고래 세비 온두신에 안데 데짐발 마선 당보 가래 냠는 니바 가래 냠는 지고래세 온두신 자상 싱그리에서 되벼침 셰버 요새 데니게 퇴바집에 편여해서다 데나 하고나 먼저 신유도 다 퇴비게 편여로 와서 연된 기고래제.
Through hearing about the Dharma, we come to understand that the afflicted minds, such as anger, cause us pain. And not only do they cause us pain now, but they lead us to create the causes of future suffering. And therefore, they need to be abandoned. But through hearing about the Dharma, one doesn't only hear about what needs to be abandoned, one also learns about what needs to be cultivated, what needs to be adopted. So these will be the antidotes to the afflictions. Antidotes such as impermanence, love, compassion, and the wisdom realizing emptiness. And one doesn't only hear that these are antidotes, but one hears or learns about how to cultivate them within oneself, and thereby be able to abandon the afflictions. So again, by hearing the Dharma, one comes to know what should be abandoned, the afflictions, and what should be adopted, the antidotes such as impermanence, love, compassion, and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So through hearing teachings and reflecting on them, one will come ever more, as one gains more knowledge and experience through reflection, one will come to recognize the arisal of afflictions, and one will be able to skillfully apply antidotes to them. And one will come to understand how to progressively train one's mind to abandon ever deeper rooted levels of afflictions. So this then is a very clear benefit of listening to the Dharma.
Denige tebe tobi da panja da lanja dirisha nyomo padi panwala nyembo dike tengu ha goyodu han dela den tebale den tebe ge donle den ha goyodu an garsne dile dobarche sedu jenege nyomo be dibale je dibale dobi dokcho ane 추림소야디 곰 냠내지기리 해서 그래 추림소야 냠내지도 용거래 해서 tebe dile dobarche.
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. So one comes to understand what should be abandoned and how to do so. And this then leads to the second line. I'll just change the translation slightly. Through listening, non-virtue is overcome. So through listening, one comes to understand the harm afflictions play, and that they always play, are never justified. Moreover, one understands what the relevant antidotes are and how to apply them, such as ethical restraints. And in this way, as one develops an ever more ethical outlook, one turns away or overcomes non-virtue. That then is the meaning of the second line.
Nang kunlo san shanlia nebe sanbi kunya la de shanlia tik tsuk da nga kya da ane chige juyin da dine shebi ge dipa che lu yu kone shen yu so jue ba da kuma go wa da ane ju lo yim che ba la so ba dipa che go wa ane sem gi thone an do shen shanlia ne ba da an chige kontro da nga ya da ji cha do san ba ne dipa che go wa dine za di do cho la ma ju lu yu kone juyin sheba dipa di do cho nge juyin shi me se be surim song de lu yu kone shala che de lu yu kone shala ne ba chi me se be surim so ya da de ne ge samlo thone shala ne ba chi me se be je sa tang zu surim so ya se de so je bi ge chi me se be so je di kun long ge do cho di so je me se be samlo de ba je sa do se ra je sa digle dos kunlo di dipare ti so je yu kunlo di dipare di wange lunga gi le cheba de dipacha jesa dipa di do cho so je me sambe samlo de so yu churim so wa se ro do cho di na xin xian le che yue san ba somebody docho de ya shan la chawa chi mebe shan la docho jamba de jawa jeba de jamba samlo komyo de ne chi docho komgo la 제가 데니기 디 도초 수rim송에 되지 수림 대랑한 적에다 저게 망고용 그래 가서 다 수림실에 비 중화에다 변을 쏟아르게 된 수련다 자주선비 수련다 항상 수림해야 되게 연구로와 안디 멤버들네 하나서 기능에 도배선의 수림해야다 안지 년내기 수림해야 데니게 소야게 소야도 간절에 네바딜 도초 송고레스 데네 수림송야 되라다 소소라랑기 next somebody new bada mira chi tumbe to ane surum soya de ngora chi da gajelo dona denigi theba che de pangja de nyembo de pangja da langja de pa xin ha gwa che sa da lang gwe da ha gwo yo de deni pangja di ba de ge do bi do cho nyembo de pa tu nyam sa lang gore nyam sa la de surum sung gore che de sa zo da surum de sung gore
Through listening, non-virtue is overcome or bad actions are reversed. Through hearing about what the causes for suffering is, namely the afflictions, and learning about how to overcome being influenced by the afflictions, one can turn away from a motivation that is afflicted. So for example, when one gives rise to the determination that I will no longer speak in a harsh manner to others, or in a divisive manner, or lie to others. When one gives rise to such a motivation, or perhaps on the physical level, where I will not engage in violent conflict with others or steal from others, with such a motivation, one overcomes non-virtue, in that one no longer will engage in such virtue. How so? Through cultivating the virtuous mind that commits to refraining from engaging in such behavior. So this is ethics. This is ethics, and it may well be enhanced by taking vows of not to engage in such behavior. And this only comes about through hearing, coming to know the faults of the afflictions, and thereby giving rise to the determination, I won't let them influence me anymore. Moreover, one may develop one's ethics further and not only refrain from engaging in non-virtue, but engage in the opposite, virtuous minds. So instead of killing, one will rather preserve life where one can. So this word that we have translated as reversed, or can be translated as overcome, it is also the same word for the opposite, for opposite. So a deeper way to understand through listening bad actions are reversed is through listening one engages in the opposite to bad actions. So this is where one takes one's ethics further and not only commits to not harming, but to actually engaging in beneficial actions. And again, these may be enhanced by taking vows. Because amongst the types of ethics, the ethics of protecting vows is a primary form of ethical restraint. So through looking at the first two lines, through listening, the Dharma is understood. So coming to understand the Dharma, one knows what to turn away from, what are the causes for suffering, and how to turn away from them is through knowing and then cultivating what is to be adopted, wholesome ways of thinking, such as ethical restraint. And in this way, one either, or perhaps both, overcomes non-virtue or engages in the opposite to non-virtue, namely virtue.
소치베게 소치되게 삼려 군롱한체 디 군롱원게 샤는 소치바디기 디바체고로와 자산디 디바디 도발체에서 매바 소고레서 디 매바 소야라 가르스네 디 도초게 삼로 수림송제 수림송이 도초게 그런 거 도초 소치긴 셈비게 삼로디 쥐디고 삼로디 도초 소치기 매 셈베 삼로디 고면 니바체를 땅디 니도 그 소치디게 삼로디 파 도고레스 매바서 고레 제가 디 도초게 삼바 안 수림디 송요디 어느 디 슈겐이다 수코스찬리아 소치디게 삼로디 도도하스 제가 디바디기 두시네 디바티 도초 수름 송할 때에 공발에 때네 디바디 도발 지고래 사id 도바 사id 도초 공발에 지고래 양코 매버서야라지 니가를 고고래 제 도발 지세데.
Through listening, bad actions are reversed. Or the alternative, through listening, one engages in the opposite to bad actions. So the way to understand here this term opposite is that on one hand, one may have the motivation to bring harm to others, say to kill. So if one cultivates the opposite motivation, which would be, I will not kill. So the ethical restraint of committing to not killing. This is then how, through cultivating the opposite motivation, one refrains from non-virtue.
다지기 수dum이 라바 냠는 제리에 송거라. 다 퇴배 되마 임바 뽕 세드. 다 가르쳐 거서 지단 되니게 퇴네 퇴바치 디비 도초 수dum송하데 냠술라하데 하고 냠술라. 되네 수dum송이 수dum지 냠술라위 시시베 토네 안에 디버 뽕야려야 안에 셈 tempo kuguare ko sem tempo tsechik pa tempo sumba ba na nega jing di ko ma pang thuya de sabona che pang thuya la ka le khabu chi gu yan sa sem tempo ding jin tu bu re so le de ma ma yin ba tebe de ma yin ba pong se de ma yin ba dibi gi diba de ma yin ba diba se je san de ma bi diba sabona che ba pang ba la sem tsechi be ding jin ma du ba na di dong pong thuya me ba sa de za sem di pong ala pong go ba sa sem che tsechi be ding ju ne che ga so ding jin gi nyam le de che go re je jin de ni gi che go ba da ha gu gu wa de ba che de ha go ne de ni ge ne je 수름 시송외 돈에 샘제집에 띵해줄 주비 띵해진 냠는데 용그레스 디 냠는 용아디 다 퇴버집에 파열을 해서 올라.
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. So this is a general statement. Then the second line, through listening, bad actions are reversed, specifically refers to ethical restraint. The third line, through listening, the meaningless is abandoned. So another way to express it, through listening, one abandons engaging in what is not meaningful, what is meaningless. What this refers to is as one's mind becomes ever more ethical, as one's ethical restraint becomes ever more developed, one's mind becomes stable. It's becoming stable because it's not so swayed by the afflictions. It doesn't waver from due to the afflictions, because that one is restrained through ethics. One is restrained from the afflictions. This is the prerequisite to develop concentration. So through turning away from the afflictions, the mind becomes stable, becomes calm, and through hearing, then one comes to know the importance of ethical restraint. And moreover, that's the second line, independence on ethical restraint, concentration can be cultivated. So this then is a further benefit of listening to the Dharma.
지사다 퇴배냥한 데바 톱스도 지니기 퇴바지 퇴비게 삼로 주름소야 시제 되는 띵해진 주베 띵해진 제주도 그 띵해진 냠는지야다 띵냠는 제발을 때는 안지 대코나유 또베 셔라 다음에 봐 동방이 또베 셔랍티 냠수 렘발을 때네 아니 뇽모 가도 딕베 유 뇽모바 사보나 제바 빵바디 토요도 방바 톱투레스 디 방바 톱투요 냥알레 대바세 자준벽과 토고레스 제가 냥알레 대바세 냥알세디 뇽몽발레고 뇽몽바 사보나 제바 매바 델레 방투그레 방그레스 디 방바자 자준바 방투그레스 제가 디네자다 디니게 셔랍게 냠네 셔레냠 디니게 퇴바지디 퇴베제 제발라 디는 아니 셔레게 냠는 제바 하고 다음에 봐도베 셔라 냠는 제바 디 냠는 제발라 때네 안에 가르소네 뇽모바 사바데 제 방투 그래서 지는 양알레 대바 투 그래서 타바도 투 그래서 돼서 퇴비게 파열해서
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. Through listening, bad actions are reversed. That refers to ethical restraint. Through listening, the meaningless is abandoned. That refers to concentration. Through listening, nirvana is achieved. So through listening, receiving teachings, reflecting on them, one comes to understand the sequence that through cultivating an ethical mind, through cultivating ethical restraint, one's mind becomes skilled in being restrained from being influenced by the afflictions. This then enables the mind to become stable, and concentration, single-pointed concentration, can be developed. One also comes to understand that independence on the cultivation of single-pointed concentration, all the teachings that one has been receiving on selflessness and how to cultivate the wisdom realizing selflessness, this realization can come about in a powerful and truly transformative manner, because it's the wisdom realizing selflessness or emptiness that is the supreme antidote to the afflictions. When one comes to understand through hearing that when one trains in ethics and independence on that concentration, then independence on that, one can cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the antidote to the afflictions, enabling one to abandon the afflictions together with their seeds completely. And that leads to the attainment of the state of nirvana, where the practitioner becomes an arhat. So all of this comes about in dependence on hearing. So in this way, we come to understand the benefits of listening to the Dharma.
단념도다 그 퇴섬 곰숨 세디 송도와 퇴배의 직당보 퇴배 최남 셰바를 유로스는 당보 퇴바지 퇴바지도 안 퇴바지비 되는데야 삼백의 삼중안에 최 빠자다 빵잡디리 랑자디리 빠자디 님보 댄스 공고르스 된다디 신기로 와서 제상 퇴바지에도 퇴배되 삼중의 셰랍 기기를 해서 제상 퇴배 최남 셰바를 유로스 다 되니가 하고 여도 데네 퇴베딜레 포 독바르지 세드 데니기 아니 디파디게 포야 독쇼 안 추름숨에 시숨에 토네 아니 가르레게선 퇴베 되마인바 뽕 세드 띵인신 신여주야다 아니 곰바치에 쳐걸 띵에제 추름 시숨에 토네 아니 띵에진 주에 신여 곰야 디 된도 아니 신여주베 줍서에 제라야 아니 시라 송대기 동바 일메 시라 송저 곰야 디 곰발에 때네 냐데 사이 탈베고 덮투레스 냐냐모 방투그레 세지 제가 퇴바세데 제침보시고레 제가 퇴바라 때네 삼중의 시랍 기그레 삼중의 시럽 깨발라 때네 너 곰중 곰투그레 곰중 그 약을 곰투유도 아니 냐모 바 찾아 방투그레 세지 언도 숨거다.
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. So here one is encouraged to hear teachings, reflect on them, and eventually to be able to meditate on them. This way one comes to understand, through hearing and reflecting, one comes to understand what are the causes of our suffering and how to abandon them. In other words, what needs to be abandoned and what needs to be adopted or cultivated within oneself. In the second line, through listening, bad actions are reversed. So here one trains in ethics, the foundation from which all good qualities arise, or in dependence on our training in ethics, where one cultivates the opposite to non-virtuous ways of thinking, the virtuous minds of ethics. One has the foundation then, for the third line, through listening, the meaningless is abandoned. Through no longer being swayed by the afflictions, what has no meaning is abandoned, and one's mind then is suitable to cultivate, through its stability, one can cultivate single-pointed concentration and meditative insight. And independent on the two, the union of calm abiding and meditative insight, comes the final line. Through listening, nirvana is achieved, where one can cultivate wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, and in this way abandon the afflictions together with their seeds and attain nirvana.
어디니 자단 지산 퇴바 맞이나 마퇴바이나 돈다디 지가 하고야 말하고 말해서 돈다 신말와 돈다 하 먹거나 델레미 비고 고미야 지지도 고미야세요 말했어. 곰바메나 안녀모 바투 말했어. 지자디 빵마도나 코르둥알 저tuk 말이지 지나 코발은 내야 돼. 우리와다 되니자 마텨바이나 되니 된다 하고요 말에. 된다 하 먹었나 텔레미 비고메요 말. 고마메나 아니 녀모 방도 말이스. 제가 되니자 퇴고야 되게 침벌이 제가 되니 게침벌이 제가 찾아다 돼서 퇴발 삼중의 시럽게야 아니 검중의 시럽게야 네 공발에 때네 자준비 제부 토야 찾아나 퇴바집에 퇴배 판열에 스마트바이나 돼서 용고 말해야지.
From this verse, we can see the great benefits in hearing teachings on the Dharma, because through listening, the Dharma is understood. So without hearing teachings, one will not understand the Dharma, which means what will one meditate on? One will have no knowledge. And if one listens only a bit, one only has a little bit to meditate on. And without meditation, it is not possible to abandon the afflictions and together with their seeds, and therefore nirvana cannot be achieved. So without listening, without going through these 4 steps, freedom from suffering, freedom from pain cannot be achieved. So reflecting on this verse then serves as contemplating the benefits of listening to the Dharma.
네네. 나 지단에 디로와 당한 지단에 롭종으로 치네 당한 저기 지딘비게 기 롭종한테 가르네 당보직 랍칸 지설이야 퇴시 데네 퇴네 장의 신용마도 마트나 지기 랍칸 지면에 신야가래 하고로와 보충지도 아메기에 살려절이야 콜이야 지금 이기다 강하야 지레가다 랍자 지 가야 말아베나 칼라서야 말아 데네 레가 지 롭종에 이기들 레가 가야 말아바지 보고지파 긴 칼라데 두샤자베네 야야 수고랑도 그 가고 신발와 되네 되게 Geshe 신도 말와다 제가 신말와 딩한테 지딘베 자와르시네 가이네 콜랍네 신고도 지지 라베라 당보 데네데네다디 제거서 암졸로 퇴야데 게침물에도 와다 데네자디 당보 퇴야가데 게침물에 해야 되다 당한테 지소게 롭종롭시네 게침물 진짜 다 징아 주기 삼로트네 규와다야 될다 이인데 이로와다 진짜디네 퇴비게 게침부에 받은 우인에서도 tum바로 송거와 맞아제 지금 우인에서 받은 비게 산이가 어디 퇴고래서 시골에 제고래서 송거 말아 당도 심주시나 다 우인에서라는 송도와
Just first as an aside, this word hearing we can also understand to mean listening as well as education. So now to come together as commentary. So in society, education is seen as very important. And to gain an education, it's imperative to have a teacher, someone to guide you. In other words, someone that one would listen to. Because without having someone to listen to, without having a teacher, someone to guide you, how can one come to know anything? For example, we know young children are very vulnerable. They have to be fed in order to survive. But if they are only fed, they will learn nothing. On their own, they can't learn a language. They need to be taught. They need to be guided. They need role models. So from the very outset in society, as well as throughout one's life, education is seen as very important.
네, 나데네게 다디디게 퇴섬 퇴비게 파연들라 삼중오래 삼중규 될때는 곰줄리기리 될때는 녀모 바투그리 사 퇴섬 곰솜디 송거로 안디 마제 안냐 퇴비 추놈 셰버기로 세비 퇴바지오래 세게 주무제 퇴발에 때는 안에 방자다 랑제디 신용그리 지단 디시비 퇴비 딜렸던 도파치스 수준이 냠는 용그리 자다 되네게 추진 냠는 제발 시송배 때네 안에 퇴비기 디법방에 냠부 저 띵해진 거면 용구레스 지네 띵해진 공발에 때네 안에 그소라 대관하니 미네 공배기 안에 실라 송지 공유레 세대 지네 되네 공발에 때네 냥한테 산육 탈벼톱 투그레 세대 송어도 내려야 안에 라바수미 냠네 추진이 라베 냠네 안에 띵해진 라베 냠네 샤라이 라베 냠네 라바수미 냠네 뒤에 송거래 즉시디 대시시디게 퇴섬 곰숨 계시면 맞이제 난 이베들 가르고 있으네 될야 라바숨이 냠네 dellatene töba jebalatene labasum nyamle yagungure labasum nyamle jebalatene an tarbe ko toptugo dichaza an tebe panyres.
Through listening, the Dharma is understood. So this first line again, just to repeat, presents where one comes to gather knowledge on what should be adopted and what should be abandoned and how to do so, the why and the how. Then in dependence on that, through listening, non-virtues overcome. So this is the cultivation of ethics. Through listening, the meaningless is abandoned. This is where one cultivates independence on ethics, single-pointed concentration. And independence on concentration, through listening, nirvana is achieved. Wisdom, the wisdom realizing emptiness, is cultivated. So what we have in this verse is the threefold presentation of hearing, reflecting, and meditating, as well as the three higher trainings, of the higher training of ethics, the higher training of concentration, and the higher training of wisdom.
Dine jeba shi is dinige jeba 60 days or 60 botsigare in Shiva digida, Geshe Thubten Rabten, the Jirimchigi, Geshe Gore, the Jinel Shiva de Chiba de Tangish. Jeba shi is a Tubala Dine, Rimbashin, Langdurgi, and Shepa Tangas, Jezadi, Chue di Pa, Tueje, Nyayodu, Nirimba Biligil Tambo. And the Rimbashindo, Langdurgi Nation said, Langjadi Karakarimba, Panjadimba Karakarimba, just a Panjadi, Panaki, Nyambo district, Lacom Jawanga, Nyamsu Lengo, Dirias, Didondadige, Langdurgi, Ne, and the Ganesh Horus, the Nigidondati Shingriesa, just a Tubu Chunum Shepherd used to be 60, Geshe.
Returning to the text, then we come to Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on the Buddha's sutra. These 4 lines say that in reliance upon listening, an understanding of what should be, it just misses a word, what should be sequentially adopted and discarded develops. So this word that we have as gradually, it's a common mistranslation, it should rather be sequence or sequentially. These 4 lines say that in reliance upon listening, an understanding of what should be sequentially adopted and discarded develops. So as just presented, through hearing teachings, one comes to understand the correct sequence to train one's mind and how to do so, what ways of thinking, that afflictions need to be abandoned, and which ways of thinking, wholesome minds, need to be developed.
Shene Niejule Dobu Tsutrim Dance, Tsutrim Dance, that did that Tsutrim Dance, said the Jibure. She's not the Shene Niejule Dobu Tsutrim City, it's not Turbachine, and this Bangja, the Langjadi, Nesu Sheondu, the Nipangja Nyaba Dile Dobi, Childu, Doba, Nieju Dile Dojo, and Tsutrim Sung Yam the Yungri, says Shene Niejule Dobu Tsutrim, said Tsutrim Yam the Yungri.
The second sentence, this knowledge gives rise to the ethical conduct that overcomes wrongdoing. So this then is how one refers to then also the second line of the verse. Through listening, bad actions are reversed. So one turns away from or overcomes harmful behavior through cultivating the opposite, ethical restraint.
Tebe Chenum Gasore, Tebe de Mayimba Pong Sadire, Dene sa de Mayimbala Lone, Give me Bala Sem Jitter Deber Nepi Dings in Javatangs. Tina Denigi Tebig, some Gene Tuba Chedu, and Banjata Lange in the situation. Banja Lange in the Sudan, never the Dobach, Surim Jisung, that Surim Shison will turn it, and the dead, never the Dobaki. The talk shop, Savana Cheba Paya, Nimbo, and the Gawal may be Zibi things in Nukum to Congress, Yamla Yungres, Deber Navy things in Java dance, Yamla she needs on rather thing at Congress.
Lama Tsongkhapa continues, then once you have turned away from meaningless pursuits, concentration arises and the mind stays on a virtuous object as long as you wish. Here, having cultivated the higher training in ethics, then one's mind is no longer so easily swayed by the afflictions, making the mind suitable to train and develop single-pointed concentration and thereafter meditative insight. And these are indispensable for the actual realization of emptiness.
다메베 데코나니 디니 또베 다메베 디니 또베 셰럽기 라베 코버리 칭베 자와네 남줄 토버 송소 세데 지산 데네게 다 띵이진 공베 또게 공베 디젤라네 다메 발미베 동니에 미베 띵이진 데네 실라 송도 줍네 동방이 또베 셰럽디 라바 디 공발레 데네 코버 칭지 아니가서 코와로 거기 유소 덴진 마릭바 디 안에 자원파 사번의 제바 자원의 시주 사번의 제바 방진에 데네 코와를 드위게 남조서 코와를 넘버 드위게 토보서 타바 토그리에스 데네 송샤서 통송소 세데
And then Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary on the fourth line of the verse, through listening nirvana is achieved, is the final sentence. Finally, through training in wisdom, realizing the suchness that is selflessness, the root of samsara's fetters is cut, and you attain nirvana or liberation. Having cultivated the indispensable foundations to progress to the point where one can realize emptiness or selflessness. First, the high training in ethics and independence on this, the high training in concentration. One is now able to meditate effectively on emptiness, and in this way, abandon the root cause of all suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping, and thereby abandon the afflictions together with their seeds, and attain nirvana, or liberation from the sufferings of samsara.
디네 자다는 저기 되네야 안 디네 기다데 태비 좀 소용도 디기 치디기 저와 제르미 체게 마드시게도 퇴가소데 주링이 라바다 퇴바 제발에 되네 아니 지게 방자 랑제는 남 시기리 대신부여도 아니 디 방제 님보 바 도야게 도초 아니 주링이 라바 송지네 주링 라바야고 송 대용그레 주링이 라바 송와데 되네 텔레네 디네기 띵에진 신의 줍 안에 띵에진 라바디게 두고래 띵에진 라바기에도 안 다음에 바토베 셰랍텔레 셰랍게제데 실라송제데 곰제네 그 디곰발레 되네 네 타바톱 두고래에서 제산 퇴비 솜디게 흉디게 된다 두순고래 제네 다 제름시 마도시 되시 두스낭도와
Lama Tsongkhapa then explains the sutra called Verses About Listening by presenting, as I just have, that through first hearing about the Dharma and reflecting on it, one comes to understand very clearly what needs to be abandoned, namely the afflictions, and what needs to be adopted, namely virtuous minds, and how to do so. Thereafter, one cultivates the higher training of ethics, which ethical restraint being the opposite of the afflicted motivations that lead to non-virtue, one cultivates a high training in ethics. And with this indispensable foundation, one is then ready to develop single-pointed concentration through cultivating the higher training in concentration, because now the mind is much more stable, no longer being so easily swayed by the afflictions. And this is the foundation that's required to develop single-pointed concentration. And with the higher training and concentration completed, which is when one has a union of calm abiding and meditative insight, then one has the indispensable basis for cultivating the higher training in wisdom, and thereby coming to realize emptiness, cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness, and attain liberation from samsara in its entirety.
징 하나 중에 지삼 다음에 디지도 비는 하나 중에 지 샘제 속죽매 삼비게 삼로디 지까지 지 삼다지까지 여변에 디수기 샘제로 소죽에 삼 속죽매 삼비 삼로 유디 so 주기를 선배 주인 선배 삼로도 영하기도 매르와 세상 당 한쪽에 추름자들 되게 고음네 기디나도 고음여도 기디나다 니쿠와다 다음에 발라 냠바라 샤바 있는 마도 냠바라 마샤바 있나 기디나가서 섬려야 되니 소주에서 저기 지금이 선배기 샬야 네베게 소주바도 구마 저기는 지금이 선배 삼로디 기디나 코르도야 지금 연구해 봐나 되네 거 소주야다 구마 구야 되기네 kunlunga samlo di gyue yongya meharwa. Sisang kuma kuyegi kunlunga samlo da so chue di yu kunlunga me na lu yu kwa ni shanle so chue bada kuma kuwa di yongya gyue meharwa. Me panza jine zata nga zuki jike shengi so chue bada kuma kuwa me sepe samlo di yane yano samdang gom kukuri labya do dine jik pa yane yano samlo gedi na jik jen yongya sub chagor wada jen tuya chagor jengor wada. Jing nga zuki yane yano magomba na 제도에 시스템만이 지기하는 마고만에 한 para들고 게디나 삼나레 투고마 디삼 텔레 마토 para들 구모 구긴 셈베 삼노다 셴리아 소치긴 셈베 구노데 레그 고 지냥하시 뭐로 디네 사다간저 야네야도 공부를 해라도 저기지 두 공부했나 좀 많이 버지게 지어래서 그래 좀 많이 발라데 나는 하신이 어디 지금에 셈베 삼노데 게디나 여디 봐서 차고로 와 지난 디네가 지 곰제 좀 많이 버지 끼어야 돼 당연 예심 못 차고로 되네 자다 공부를 해야 되다 삼로 공부를 되네 삼로 공부서나 아니 공부디 약고 중마이나 디 도초 삼로디 바라신 예고 가루 그래서 그러와
Here now look at your own minds and see where your habituations to afflicted ways or non-virtuous ways of acting spontaneously arise. So we'll just take the example of killing. So here we train our mind to come to see that killing of any type in any circumstances is wrong and should be avoided. So one cultivates the determination, I will not kill. So this is just the illustration, but look at your own minds to where the habituation may be strongest. And to the extent that one reflects on that I won't kill, and not just repeating it, those three words, but the reasons why one should not, so that it becomes deeply ingrained in one that killing is to be avoided in all circumstances. To the extent that one becomes habituated to this way of thinking, the thought of, I want to kill, will not arise. And the stronger our habituation comes to this virtuous way of thinking, then the thought will not arise, no matter what circumstance one is in. Because all too often there are certain ways of talking or ways of acting that society frowns on, so therefore, when we may be observed, we do not engage in them. But when we're not observed, we may well do so. Whereas if one has developed a strong habituation to, for example, not killing, even where it's a situation where society encourages it, one will not do so. The habituation will be deep. In fact, it will seem completely unnatural, alien to one, to do such a deed, for example, killing. On the other hand, though, if one merely hears a teaching, accepts it, I've heard this before, I accept, I wouldn't do this, and one lets it go, the habituation is likely not to be very well developed. May well be one doesn't ever steal because one doesn't have the opportunity. But when one has a need and the opportunity, one may well do so because of not having cultivated a deep and transformative habituation to not stealing or not killing. And it's in this way, through repeated reflection based on hearing ever more teachings, that one takes the virtuous minds of the Dharma and integrates them deep within one's psyche, so that becomes second nature to one, and that the very thought of doing the particular activity is reprehensible, and thereby one's ethics restrains one from ever engaging in behavior that would be non-virtuous.
언니나 싫어 당은 지바로 와다 가는 주기데 샹리아 체외 삼바 당은 주기 망제 샹리아 체외 삼바 군의 농유도 디토네 단지 괴몽스리요 반자 당연히 샹리아 체외 삼바디 빠야리아 디도초 삼로 잠제 공부를 잠보 공부를 쓰고로 세와 제약이 네버 제약이 세외 삼바 쓰고로 샹리아 네버 제약이 삼바 세외 삼바디 도초들라 샹리아 잠보 공 잠제 공부를 해야지 제가 당은 저기 디링냐면 님이 가서 직 잠제 저 샹리아 직디기 주나 샘비게 샘 동안 잔다 샘베 삼는다 두스지 검자디 삼는다에 내가블라 다양한 저기 지기샹리아 체외 삼로 걸고 말에 미션다게 어디 직제가라 어디 직매 샘비게 다디 지는 야고 말선 내 직가서 지금 말와 아니 다디 가서 디 공부를 또 공부하디 지금 뉴바로 직셔라 마템 바이나 근데 지금 하나 저기다 딘마직 두스네 고메 샤샤 칠로디오 마 참여도도 갑라 다데시 고메 파 예사제 안데지 매완자 안데디 와바지도 안지 로바지 어디 직제가서도 안지 양지 념도 쇼르야게 닝아요로 와도 용고로 와다 용고로 와다 제사당은 공부 좀 많이 받 매완자 제사다 두스네 제사 잠제도 공부를 야네야도 야네 공 가지 공부이나 삼로디 아니 직 대화도 된다 샬로 동안 된다 선배 삼로도 코야야 레라와다 요가 코르투야다 코야 레라와 중거와 안디네 양도 양 공고 근데 가슴 찔려 좀 많이 봤어야 돼 같이 좀 많이 녀와지 퇴용도가 퇴나 난 게디나 니쿠베 갑다 동반이라 냠바 셰베 갑 마도바 근데 샤 게디네 샬야 디기다 되나 선배 삼로지다 셴 동안다 집에 선배 삼로디 게디나 삼로나도 예여봐 채고로 봐 근데 예여봐 인자 나 셴래 체외 삼바디 자오기네요 고비요 말에 니 후에 내가 불러나 용말 와 가서 셰바 차사디로 와 동바다 다음에 봐 동바니 냠바 셰베 내가 쓰는 거 냠샤인자 냠바 샤드에서 셴래 녀바 제 삼로도 용하면 와 다데네 니 후와 많이 받아 냠샤를 제대로 내가 쓰는 다 게디나 셴래 잠바다 제외 삼로도 예여봐서 데네 네코수르 샬리아 체외 삼바도 야 gün에 매버어. 자 체외 삼바 샬 녀바 지게 삼는 매반자 류나게 샬 녀바 제바도 용하기는 매버어. 진짜 니네 인사 잠니지 공고래 세디 야네 야도 야네 근데 쫌마 많이 바지 아주라 기투 바지 고고 지고고로다. 다 쫌마 많이 바기 소바나 니네 게디나 개화랑 주야를 마도 그직 팬비게 자와 주디게 용고마도 네코 지게 체위에 자와도 영에 매바로 차기도와 되네 자당 저기 공부를 해서도 고메디 예천부 인바디 되는 신서로 당을 찾아 놓으시네.
To give another illustration, minds wanting harm to come to others all too readily arise within us. So especially we take this in a very broad, the minds of wanting harm to come to others, if we take this in its broadest possible sense, we recognize that this readily arises within us and is expressed through either thinking, acting, physically acting or speaking. For example, criticizing others, complaining about others unnecessarily, pointing out the faults in others, perhaps even engaging in argument with others or physical altercations with others. So this all comes from a wish of wanting one's own happiness and not being particularly concerned with the happiness of others, certainly not seeing their happiness as more important than one's own. So minds such as of harm like this, again understanding it in its very broad context. From this, we engage in a wide variety of activities, whether mental or verbal or physical, that directly or indirectly bring harm. For example, you could be with a friend and talking about someone that you mutually dislike. So this is an expression that shows a lack of concern for this person that you're talking about. So this is a mind that we're deeply habituated to. or a way of thinking that we're deeply habituated to. But it is not innate to our nature. It's not innate to our character. It is merely a habituation. And therefore, it can be weakened through cultivating the contrary minds. So when one engages in meditation on love and compassion, developing the wish based on a variety of reasons which come about in dependence on all that one has heard or listened to or studied, developing the wish, may all beings, without exception, who are no different from me, may they abide in a state of lasting happiness that is not punctuated by even a moment of slight suffering. In this way, one develops love and compassion for all beings. And to the extent that one does this regularly and for a sustained period, one becomes habituated to this way of thinking. And eventually minds such as these, love and compassion, will arise in a manner that is uncontrived. But even before it's uncontrived, because of one's growing habituation, they will tend to permeate one's mind and thereby influence our way of thinking and thereby our speech and behavior. But when they've been developed to the point through repeated meditation that they are uncontrived, even in our sleep, these minds will guide our dreams, because we are so deeply habituated to this way of thinking that it does not need to be generated. It doesn't require intent for us to give rise to these thoughts of love and compassion. They spontaneously arise. And in fact then, except for when one is realizing emptiness, love and compassion will guide us. And in this case, thoughts of harm towards others and expression of such thoughts just will not come about because of our habituation through repeated meditation of love and compassion. And in this way, we'll be continuously accumulating the merit of having love for all beings, compassion for all beings. And this is why meditation is so important, because a synonym for meditation is habituation, developing habits. Meditating is developing habitual ways of thinking. Therefore, by hearing and reflecting repeatedly on, for example, love and compassion, or in the prior example, ethics, these become deeply, deeply ingrained within us. They become our very way of being.
Das maripa direshas chesa dela dene ki gudwas anzo gyula nga sebe nga rashin duba zime zimba ki dela gene dya cha khondro nga ja ki andi ki nyen shan ya chawa da deba cha da dene rashin ni gal dunga dene yongudwas chesa di meba syo ko gores da di meba syo bala 아니 지치 튕기는 거 비토네 아니 배바서 토에 매바래 다 가서 코로나 나 삼로 코로나 따제 매바서 그랬어 지단서 삼로 따는 매바서 가서 삼로 당보 따에 림바들이야 당보 간지 땅 거에디 당보 튀고 그랬어 퇴진에는 마 충름니 마 근데 지게 주름소야 되네 띵이 진 주비야 되네 다음에 보도 비 셰랍데 자와 년보디 된지기 년보 조데 다음에 보도 셰랍데 Di gomne yane yado gombale tene gombache kochoma mai ba nubachi maki yado dasi mari ba de ranshin garu kures tene gaba ne nyomo ba kya yo mari nyomo ba kya di wang dunga yo mares chesa tingi dewa de tene chutu do den dunga de tene se tu do asbe da sanji ge tablam ui ne su ko 직 심주 제네 당원에 단에 자와디 가림바데 자와니 매바 쇠디 탑람디 송고로 왔다 지장한 중에 데네기 엔자데 퇴바셔야 돼. 뱀마스 계시모레 세야지.
As one comes to train one's mind in the Dharma, or in general, training one's mind in the Dharma means coming to know one's own mind. In that, through gathering knowledge, one primarily gathers knowledge on a couple of topics: suffering and its causes, and how to gain freedom from suffering and its causes. So to train one's mind, one needs this knowledge. And then one needs to engage in the training process. These two happen together. One investigates suffering and asks oneself, does it come about causelessly or from a cause? One will always find, without exception, that suffering comes from a cause. So because suffering comes from causes, arises in dependence on causes, one then will seek out those causes. And one can point to a variety of things, but beneath them, at a fundamental level, will be our own afflictions. What causes us to suffering is the afflictions in our own mind. Those afflictions too come about in dependence on a cause. All our afflictions, all these delusions, have at their very root the ignorance of self-grasping. This is the root cause of every suffering experience of every being. In dependence on the ignorance that grasps at the self as existing in a way that it does not, attachment arises, anger arises, the wish to bring harm to others arises. So here we come to recognize that this is the chain of events that keeps us bound in suffering. It's our very afflictions that are the chains that bind us to the sufferings of samsara. And how do we come to know this? It's through hearing teachings. And how do we come to see that it's true for ourselves? It's through repeatedly hearing and reflecting. To the extent that we hear and reflect, we come to gain certainty that this is why we suffer. Moreover, whilst we are hearing about suffering and its causes, one will also keep hearing teachings on what to do about that. How to train one's mind to first not be so swayed by the afflictions, not to come under their influence. This is the cultivation of ethics, where one restrains one's mind from the afflictions, and that this, one learns, is the fundamental, is the indispensable foundation for developing a calm and stable mind that can abide on its virtuous object for as long as one wishes. Concentration. And concentration is required to be able to cultivate the wisdom that eradicates the root cause of all our suffering, that ignorance of self-grasping, that is only the wisdom realizing emptiness that can eradicate our ignorance. One comes to understand this process through hearing and reflecting on what one is hearing. And the more one hears, the more one reflects, the deeper one's experience of these virtuous minds, the deeper one's habituation to these virtuous minds will be. And this is the process by which one gains freedom from the afflictions, freedom from suffering, freedom from samsara. Hence, hearing is so important. So thank you very much then. We'll conclude there for tonight.